Hello, all the nerds out there. I hope you are doing fine. And guess today we are starting our journey into the Old English literature. I hope you all are excited like me, and let's begin, right? So, we don't really have much solid information about how English literature got its start. We have got some educated guesses and a few references from back in the day, but that's about it. And even with that limited knowledge, we have managed to piece together a pretty fascinating story that which I'll give you a quick rundown. Okay, so we'll start with the introduction, and here you can see the all the points over your screen, and that we'll discuss one by one. Okay, so I hope you all are ready. So guess what? Let's take you like fast forward through a really long period, starting around the 5th century and ending with the Normans taking over in 1066. So, Battle of Hastings, I hope you all know about it, but if you don't, we'll have another lecture on this particular event. So, anyway, in a nutshell, Romans bailed in 410 and leaving behind some half civilized Celts and who were constantly like bothered by wild Caledonian. So these desperate Celts asked the English for help, and the English showed up like heroes. But then what? Then they decided to stay and conquer everything from the English Channel to the all the continent there. And fast forward through some other stuff like the English getting Christianized, and they also got invaded by the Danes in the 9th century. And then we have that King Alfred of Essex doing his things like making peace with the Danes 878, followed by a Danish dynasty taking over 1017. And finally the English court going all fancy like French before the big Norman quest. So all these events had a big impact on the literature of the time. So let's talk about some features of this period. So everybody knows about pagans, right? I hope you have watched that series in Netflix that is Vikings, and if you have watched it, it will be easy for you to understand the culture there and what kind of things were happening and how English and these Vikings and these Celts were fighting each other. It's quite amazing. If you can watch, it's good. But otherwise, here I'm talking about the pagan origin. So the earliest poems like we have Wildish and Beowulf. So we don't have like much of Christian vibe at that time. Any Christian element were probably like clumsily added later on. So it's pretty likely that those early poems came with the pagan conquerors. So bards or gleemen or probably like sang them at warrior feast. Over time, though Christians' ideas started seeping into the heathens' poetry, but they couldn't completely shake off their primitive style. So, there is also one anonymous origins that out of all old English poets, we only know the name of one guy, and I guess you also know about that. So tell me, nerds, do you know? Can you guess the first poet? Old English? Yes, I'm getting the comments. Very good. It's Caedmon. That's correct. And there is a vague mention of another poet named. Can you guess who is it? Well, it's Cynewulf in some mysterious riddle. So as for the rest, their names are a big question mark. Prose. Now, if we come to the point like prose, prose came along much later, and since it was mostly used for practical stuff, we at least know who wrote it, right? Then we can another feature is like the imitative quality. So imitation was there in fact. So here's the thing, a lot of the prose and a good chunk of poetry are basically translations and adaptation from Latin. They loved translating stuff like saints lives and the Bible books and practical works. And in our previous class we talked about mystery miracle and all other plays. It was there also, so you go and watch that video too if you haven't. If you already did, then it's easy for you to understand the rest of the thing there. So the clergy were the main authors at that time, and they stuck to what they knew. So Old English literature can sometimes feel like a, you know, uh, anyway, leave it. That example, I don't think you'll like it. But there are few cases where the poets like Cynewulf or the prose writer like our Alfred added their own twist and expanded on things or threw it in some comments. So those moments are when things get a pretty more interesting. So here we go. The manuscript. Let's talk about the manuscript. What was there? So it's quite possible that we have lost a bunch of Old English poetry over time. But luckily, we still have some pretty, representative material left. And what are these? They are only, as we know, there are only 4 manuscripts that preserve the poetic text. And they were discovered relatively late, and they are one of a kind. We have got the Beowulf manuscript, which also has a bit of a poem called Judith, and it was found in 1705 only, and thought to be from around 1000. Another, we have the Junian manuscript, and that manuscript was found by the famous scholar Junian in 1681, and it is now in the Bodleian Library, which contains the Caedmon's poem. And the another one is the Exeter book, and this is kind of chilling in the Exeter Cathedral Library. So if you want to go chill out there, read it, or just see it, you can visit there. But anyway, since Leofric gave it to them around 1050, so it was lost for a while and then found again in 1704. And it holds holds most of the Cynewulf poems. And lastly, we have the Vercelli book, and that is discovered near Milan in 1832, which has 6 Old English poems, some prose sermons, and was probably used by some Italian Anglo-Saxon enthusiasts. So anyway, that was all about the introduction here. Let's move to the language and the poetry at that time. We'll also have discuss a little bit about Beowulf, but there will be separate session on Beowulf. I hope you will watch that. But anyway, let's move to the language and the poetry there, right? So the language, let's just give you a little bit glimpse about the language there. So back, in the day, Old English was spoken by a bunch of simple and semi-barbaric folk, and their vocabulary was really limited, and their ideas were concrete. And guess what? They were they're rough and straightforward, expressing themselves. As time went on and their literature evolved, they kind of smooth out the rough edges and become more cultured. Grammar wise, things got complicated with declinable nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and a pretty fancy verb system. Now, they had 3 main dialects at that time. Remember that question they asked. The first is Northern, or you can say Northumbrian, which was the first to produce any literature but also got wiped out by the Danes. Then again, we have the West Saxon, and which became the standard, or kind of cause most of the text were written in it. And the Cantes or Jutes, which didn't really make a big literally splash. So it was Saxon, West Saxon, where it is right now. It became the more standard language because of the most of the text was written in it. So that was all about. Let's talk about the Beowulf here and what you see in Beowulf. Well, the poem's origin is, this poem probably came about before the English invasion, and there is no mention of England in it. Also, Beowulf was a kind of hero, and he was also the king of Geats, not England. Okay, and plus the whole thing is rooted in pagan belief, so it predates their Christian conversion. So now, when it comes to who actually wrote it, we have got like no clue at all. But guess is that it's a kind of collection of tales sung by the bards, stitched together by one person and written in the West Saxon dialect. So that is the strong, or like reasonable hypothesis that we can form, right? So the story, let's talk about story. It's very simple plot. As we know, the Beowulf is the son of Acthiu, or who was the king of Geats, set sail to Denmark with his crew of heroes to help out King Hrothgar. And the poor guys like that Hrothgar was dealing with this nasty monster called Grendel. And Beowulf takes care of that problem and even takes down Grendel's mother. So after some feasting and rewards, our hero heads back home. He rules like a boss for like 40 years until he faces off against a dragon wrecking his land. Beowulf eventually slays the dragon but takes a fatal wound himself, and the poem wraps up with a big kind of funeral for our old hero, right? And let's talk about the style there. So the style is like, it is like the snippet along with the literal translation to get a taste of the style. So those short lines you see are actually half lines, and they are often printed in pairs across the pages as most addition. And when you read these lines, you'll notice the language is kind of abrupt and rough. Those half lines are often just catchy phrases called kennings, and that's very important part of English poetry. And it was thrown into like keep the story moving when the bard's creativity like or took a snap. But anyway, seriously, about half the lines in the snippets are kennings like bright burnies, beloved, like bread odd, unresting warrior, and so on. So these small points, together, these kinds of phrases pop up a lot in Old English poetry. And see how the lines have a stronger rhythm but not a strict meter. So there is also a fancy alliteration system. So when they talk about old poetry, you should remember three things, right? First is kenning, second is alliteration, and then caesura, and that is like pause in the sentence. And this fancy word of alliteration system, it is like with two alliterated sounds in the first half line and one in the second line. So when it comes to overall style of the poem, there's a lot of raw power in fighting, sailing, feasting, and they really know how to capture the terrifying sea and other wild forces. But fair warning, there is also a fair amount of repetitive and tangential stuff that can get a bit dull. So Beowulf is like a reflection of those tough and primitive seafaring folks' flaws and all. Anyway, so that was all about. Now let's talk about. We already talked about the style of the Beowulf, right? Now let's move to the other Old English poetry. So you see, the pagan poems here, and most of the Old English poetry has a religious vibe. But there are few that stray into secular territory. So if you, as I said, if you have watched that thing that the Vikings, you will understand who were the pagans and who were the pagan gods, what they were called, all these stuff, right? So anyway, there is this one guy, Witsmith, or the well-traveled guy, is considered the oldest poem in the language, and it's over 100 lines of verse where a traveler, or who's a kind of real or imaginary, it can be, blabs about all the places and people he's encountered. And it's kind of interesting because he mentions some historical figures, but let's be honest, as pure poetry, it ain't all the impressive, right? If you read it. But anyway, it's good for you if you can read. Another is Veldier, or the Walter, or simple Walter, is made of two fragments, just 68 lines in total, sharing tales of famous Burgundian hero. This one's got some real kick to it, and it stands out among the others. Then we have the fight at Finisbury, and it is a 50-line fragment, has a nicely told description of Battle of Finisbury. We have the Battle of Brunanburg, and it is exciting piece about a famous fight that went down in 937. So it's got way more spirit and original than the usual stuff, with some great description that keeps the story moving. And at the end, we have the Battle of Malden, and this is another fragment, but it's surprisingly fresh and lively. So the battle itself happened in 993, and this poem seems to have been written around the same time. Let's talk about the dramatic monologue, and these poems known as the wanderer, the seafarer, doer's complaint, the wife's complaint, and the husband message, and wolf and Eadwaiter. And also we have these all can be found in the Exeter book. So they might not have been written at the same time, but they all have this curious, contemplative sadness going on. They are kind of the oldest thing, closest thing to old English, which has like lyrics. So as poems, they're pretty unique and personal, which is not all that common for that time period. But anyway, now we'll talk about the cavemen. So cavemen group. So what happens here? There is a historian, right, Bede, who tells us that the tale of Caedmon, like he was kind of a herdsman who went from being totally tongue-tied to a bursting with poetic inspiration, thanks to some divine intervention. And he even got summoned by Hilda of Whitby, and an abbess, and became a monk. From then on, he sang about all sorts of biblical stuff. In one of the Bede's manuscript, there is a quote from Caedmon's first divinely inspired him, a rough and not so inspiring poem, or just 9 lines in the ancient Northumbrian dialect. So that's pretty much all we know about Caedmon. And there was also that in one night that divine came into his dream and told him that he should start singing. And when he started singing, he suddenly got all the muse stuff in his soul, or kind of, and he started singing, right? So writing poems. So that was his story. But anyway, in 1651, a bunch of religious paraphrases was discovered in the Junian manuscript, and they matched up with the topics mentioned by Bede. So they were attributed to Caedmon. And the poems include paraphrases of Genesis, Exodus, and Daniel. Along with these 3 shorter poems, the most important one is the Harrowing of Hell. And nowadays, the scholars believe the poems were written by different people, but they still get lumped together under the mysterious Northumbrian name. So even though the poems are uneven in quality, the good ones are strong and spirit with some decent description. On average, though, they can be kind of mediocre. So anyway, now let's talk about the Cynewulf group. And in 1840, this scholar named Campbell stumbled upon 3 runic signature in the poems called the Christ and Juliana, found in the Exeter book, and Elaine in the Vercelli book. And the signature said Cynewulf or Cynewulf. In 1888, they found another signature which was Flucian, Fwulcyn. I don't know how you'll say, but anyway, in the Fates of the Apostles. So we got these names, and that's about it for Cynewulf. So well, some elaborate life story has been cooked up for the guy, and some other poems that match his style have been attributed to him. So the Phoenix, the Dream of the Road, and the Riddles of the Exeter book are the most notable of those extra poems. And the Cynewulfian poems are way more sophisticated than Beowulf or even Caedmon hymns. So they express ideas more deeply and eloquently, relying less on those weak kenning and showing some real skill in description. So the poems have a broader scope and some lyrical passion. So they were probably written in the 10th century or thereabout. Now let's move to the prose, right? And that was all about the poetry. Now let's move to the prose here. And what we can see here, Alfred the Great in English prose. And as we know, let's talk about a little bit about Alfred the Great and why he's important in Old English literature, right? And especially prose. So there is this guy Alfred who lived way back from 848 to 900. So people like to call him the father of English literature, and whoever the scholar of English literature is, they will definitely, they are definitely aware of the father of the English prose, and who is Alfred, right? And because he was a big deal when it came to writing in English. You see, English learning was going downhill at that time because those Danes, right, and they were causing all sorts of trouble for English, and even Latin language was disappearing. So to keep some intellectual vibes among clergy, King Alfred had to translate a bunch of popular monasteries book into English, and these translation became a part of our literature and were pretty cool because he added some original stuff too. He worked on 4 books which were basically his picks from the popular treatise of that era. One is another Horatius Universal History, Bede's Ecclesiastical History, Pope's Gregory Pastoral Care, and both his Consolation of Philosophy. All these he is translated. Some people argue about whether he translated Bede or not, and there was this 5th book, a handbook, but it got lost. We don't have that, so we are not sure about the order of his translation, but they were all written in the last years of his reign. And another, now let's talk about the Alfric and Wulfstan. And so Alfric, who lived from 955 to 1020, and he was known as the grammarian because, well, he was really into grammar stuff, and we don't know how much about his life, anything about life, but he probably hung out near Winchester and became the first abbot of Insham, close to Oxford in 1006. So we are lucky to have quite a few of his works in Latin and English. So around 990 he whipped up 2 series of a version. Then around 996 he created another series called the Lives of the Saints. We also have some of his pastoral letters, a translation of Bede's De Temporibus, and even some English translation of Bible passages. But Alfric's style is very interesting because it represents the scholarly prose of his time. A century after Alfred, it's smooth and lively, but man, he loved his alliteration. It's like he couldn't get enough of it. Sometimes his style writing feels like a weird mix between poetry and prose. It's like, definitely something else. But anyway, now let's move to the Wulfstan. Sorry, Wulfstan, is it still there? I guess yes. So here now we got this dude Wulfstan, and who was the Archbishop of York from 1003 until he kicked the bucket in 1023. So when it comes to his prose, the guy had some serious style. His work survives in more than 50 homilies and famous letter he wrote called Letter to English People, or Lupi Sermo Anglos. If you want to get fancy, read in that way. But anyway, this letter of his is super passionate because describing in great details the crappy situation of English nation in 1014. So the alliteration and rhythm in his writing are kind of off the chart. It's way more pronounced than Alfric's style. But anyway, that's for Wulfstan. Now let's move to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles. And when the King Alfred himself probably inspired this bad boy. Rumor has it that he even dictated the entries about his own epic campaigns. The Chronicle has come down to us in 4 versions, and they all seem to have come from the same source. And we have got 7 manuscripts of these versions, with the most important ones being from Canterbury and Peterborough. And from the time of English invasion until 892, the books mostly agree with each other. But then things start to get, trust me, each version adds its own local events and random news, and they finish at different times. The latest one ends around the middle of the 12th century. Right, so that is here all about this Old English translation. Now let's summarize everything. We also talked about the literary forms, right? So the development of literary forms in Old English is like, a bit like watching a sloth climb a tree. It's very slow. But you can still see some progress if you, look at hard enough. And so poetry takes the lead here. It kicks off with the Beowulf, which is like the Hulk version of an epic poem. So you can imagine Beowulf as Hulk. But anyway, sure, it's not as refined as the classical epics, lacking unity, fancy motives, but it's got some like raw power and a touch of majestic crudeness. Not too shabby for the English epics, humble beginnings. Then we have these other poems of Kidman's, and which can be a bit long-winded and preachy, but it's a narrative, right? So we are actually revising everything whatever we have studied. So now when it comes to lyrical poetry, these short intense bursts of personal emotion, so it's like trying to find a unicorn in a haystack. So we have got some few dramatic monologues also, like Doer's Complaint, but they are more like the epic dramatic cousins, and they have got some of that lyrical melancholy and personal emotions, but they are a tad too long-winded to be a true lyric. So moving on to prose, it's mostly a translation party. Old English prose is like that person who always follows the original recipe, right, without adding their own touch. So we have got lots of homily, some history, and a handful of pastoral letters. So all based on Latin works. So originally is in short supply here, and with only a few scattered snippet or cannings that there too we have. So the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles attempt some historical writing, but it's still in like the baby steps. And then the style, if you talk about the development of literary style, so it's like poetry wise we have two stages, like right, Beowulf and Cynewulf. And in the Beowulf era the style is a bit choppy and all over the place. They love their canning phrases which are like fancy metaphor or simile. So in the Cynewulf era things get more passionate and insightful. They tone down the stock phrases and aim for fancy stylistic effects, and they are really trying to, if you can compare to the music, they're trying to make it a jazz at the time, but I'm just kidding. But anyway, prose on the other hand starts off a bit wobbly with Alfred's prose. So the sentences are loose, the vocabulary is kind of sad, and there's no rhythm or flow to speak of. But fear not, because Wolfson steps in and of course saves. Yes, and his prose is more lively and confident. He's throwing in alliteration, rhetoric figures left and right like a word-slinging magician. But again, even with all these development, there were already signs of trouble brewing. And in the last century of the period, the poetic fire was dwindling. After Cynewulf, it's like they forgot how to rhyme. So prose wasn't faring much better either. And the language itself was getting a bit weak. The grammar was falling apart, and the English vocabulary was getting a sneaky French makeover. And that's all happened because of those French, right? And then the Norman conquest swooped in and put an abrupt end to this already struggling process. So the development of literary forms in English was like watching a turtle race against a hare, except the hare got eaten by a dragon before the finish line. So that's all about Old English period, nerds. And remember, like the video, subscribe the channel, and follow that bell icon. If you can do that, no. If you don't want to listen, it's okay. But anyway, just do that, and I'll see you tomorrow. And we'll talk about Beowulf, right? So be there, it's very important, and we'll have some fancy adventure as well, right? So thank you all, and bye-bye.